What's going on, guys? John Hendricks here alongside Ross Jackson here for Second and Saints. About to come with you and get you ready for Saints training camp. We're 2 weeks away, and we'll be right back. Oh man. Oh man. Oh man. I swear we've never done this before. I remember my first time doing a podcast.
I was literally like in the middle of yawning. I didn't realize we were doing cold opens, and it's like I had like yawned. I didn't make that easy for you.
Yeah, I didn't. It's okay. It's okay. It happens, man. It's okay. It's okay. Well, hey, thanks for tuning in, guys. It's a fabulous Tuesday evening, and we're here to talk about Saints training camp. Ross, how are you doing this evening, man?
Say again?
I said, how you doing this evening, man?
Oh man, wonderful, wonderful. It's a little rainy here, so it's very loud outside of my window. But outside of that, like it's been great. It's great to be back home and everything too. How you been holding up, man?
I hear that, man. It's good. Man, it's been fun. I trying to get away. I survived Florida. I didn't get bit by sharks or anything, so that
There
was
you
always
go.
good. So I don't know what else I could I don't know what else I might be able to say. It's been kind of low key, and man, 2 weeks away from Saints training camp. So I'm so excited, so happy. We'll be in California. We got some pretty exciting news to share with everybody that's tuning in. So I can't wait to talk about that towards the end and such. But Ross, we're obviously here talking about Saints training camp. Some of the biggest question marks or questions that we have for this team. I mean, there's obviously a ton. Pressure's on Saints 9-8 last year. They've got to make the playoffs this year, right? I think that's the pressure. And we saw OTAs, we saw minicamp, we saw all the things, rookie minicamp. So now we're at the point where the pressure cooker's kind of turning up. The pads are going to come on, all that fun stuff. And so, what's kind of your general vibe going into Saints training camp?
I would say exciting. That's the easy kind of big thing for me so far is that I'm excited to see what this new offense is going to look like. It's kind of the first big change that the New Orleans Saints have had on the offensive side of the football since 2006. And I want to see how it's going to pan out. Klint Kubiak in 2021 did some nice things with Minnesota, but there was a little bit of, Kirk Cousins, making some things happen there. Having Justin Jefferson certainly didn't help. I mean, it certainly didn't hurt and all that. So I'm excited to see sort of this next stint of a more experienced Klint Kubiak with an experienced roster and one that's ready to embrace kind of a new approach over on the offensive side. So I would say excitement is kind of the biggest thing for me so far.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that you look at everything, how the Saints team is stacked up. I mean, I think the offense is obviously going to be the focal point, for everything. And I think that how they approach this, the offensive line, defensive line, we got to figure out the trenches. We know what we're going to get with some of the things, big storylines ahead. But, tonight we want to focus on some of these big questions that we have for the Saints that we want to see answered going into Saints training camp. And, I put out 25 of those on Saints News Network. You can be sure to check out all that on si.com/NFL/Saints, shameful plug, all that fun stuff. But when we look at it, I think we can tackle some of the biggest questions. I think that's the big ones that we want to do. But the first one I think that we start with is Alvin Kamara. That's the biggest storyline going on right now. Is he going to be a holdout? Are we going to see him in training camp? Is that going to be a thing once we get into training camp?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the biggest story right now. I wouldn't be surprised if at least at the beginning of training camp, we don't see Alvin Kamara around or something like that. Like maybe it takes a couple days or whatever. I wouldn't really start to get too concerned about that until you got a couple weeks into camp. If he's still not around, then I think, okay, that's the point where you consider it a big deal. But from the very beginning of this, from the moment that that final mandatory minicamp day, I've kind of been in the same place of, I don't expect things to be fine and dandy, ready to go the very first day of camp, but it wouldn't surprise me if things got taken care of early on in camp and then he was ready to go. This isn't an issue of 2024. This is more an issue of 2025. And I think that ends up making a big difference. So I would say, at least at this time, that for me, that's the way that I look at it, maybe panning out for now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that you look at it, Kamara, it's a big thing, right? I mean, he could be a holdout. I hope that's not the case. I don't think that we look at how everything's structured, right? I mean, the Saints front office and obviously Kamara's agent, they're going to be talking. But, if you look at how it's going to present itself, I think that he's going to be able to go in there, be able to, get a nice little deal because he's going to be a big focal point for Klint Kubiak's offense. So I don't foresee this. And again, we talked when we were last here on the pod at the end of June, we talked about we're not hitting the panic button yet. We're going to get their rookies report on July 16th, and then the veterans are a week behind on the 23rd, or, that's right, that math for a week. And so, we're going to get to hopefully talk to Dennis Allen. We might talk to Mickey, but we're going to find out a little bit more insight on some of the guys that might be on the pup, different things along that lines. But I think with Kamara, we're still not in the stage where you should be panicked. I think sometimes no news is good news. When it's quiet, it's not a bad thing.
Yep.
It is obviously, I think the top storyline going into camp is he going to be available? Is he going to be there first day when this team suits up and puts on the pads?
Yeah, and especially with the way that the CBA kind of works now, holdouts just seem very unlikely from the very beginning. At this point, what you're probably looking at more than anything else is like present but not participating kind of a thing, and a hold in is what they're calling it nowadays. I could see that potentially being the route that Alvin Kamara ends up going. We've certainly seen players do that before here in New Orleans. And so I wouldn't be surprised if maybe that's the route that it all goes. That way you don't pick up all those fines and stack up all of that money that you end up having to pay and everything like that. It's just a better situation altogether to kind of go the hold-in route than the holdout route. So I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see a holdout, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see everything all fine and dandy, peachy keen right off the bat when it comes to the beginning of camp.
Yeah, for sure, man. I got to tell on myself here, guys. We don't have we're not crazy, but I was hearing an echo. I was hearing a delay, and I forgot I had the YouTube stream going on there, so I kept hearing echoes and stuff. So that's why,
that's why the delay was there too.
And I'm like, yeah, of course. It's just kind of like that live broadcast. So I'm sorry about that, guys. But again, like I said, I remember my first podcast and stuff, but that's just the type of stuff you get when you tune in a second and say, you just don't know what's going to happen. And this is a byproduct of what's going to happen. Now,
I love it.
Into California, we're going to have plenty of things shored up and all that other stuff. And so, I definitely want to get some of this. Look, this is a good question. I want to obviously talk about some of these too. Any updates on the Superdome? Didn't you go to the see some of the stuff, the renovations or things that they're doing? I could be wrong, but I think you saw that.
Yeah, I went out to some of that. That was a little while ago, but I mean, I think that it sounds like they're on track for everything that they've been expecting to kind of get done. I know that there was kind of this whole, hey, they ain't paid their bills. Well, you ain't give us the paperwork. What paperwork kind of stuff? They kind of went back and forth, but it seems like that's all been taken care of at this point. So I wouldn't be worried too much about it at this point. It seems like everything's still right. It seems like everything's still back on track. I thought that some of the stuff that we did get the opportunity to see was pretty cool. Like the markets and everything like that. The food is a little bit of a better quality. Like they really upscaled the food. There's markets now to where you go and you grab a bunch of snacks and you put them on this almost like a scanner almost, and then it just automatically charges you. So it just expedites your process and stuff like that. So there's a lot of cool stuff, a lot more open area, easier to move around, a lot more walkable area too, which I know fans will be very excited about. But yeah, I think that's the majority of what we had gotten to see so far. And so they had finished up one side, or they were in the process of finishing up one side. They were beginning over on the other side. So hopefully we'll see some more progress and all of that once you get back to the stadium this year.
Yeah, and of course we know the clock's ticking because they have the
Yeah.
preseason game. The finale is going to be against the Titans, and it's a 1 p.m. kickoff, so that'll be interesting. Kind of get our first taste of it, and then obviously the first week's home opener is going to be against the Panthers at home, and so they got to do some things. But I think they've taken it every year where as soon as the Saints season is over, they start doing a lot of the renovation work here, and so I think it's definitely going to it'll look fine, and it has to because the Super Bowl's coming to New Orleans this year. So they got to get this done. Yeah. It's going to get done, and it'll be fun. It'll be awesome. It's been kind of awesome to see the Superdome just kind of transform in the past like 10-ish years and stuff. And everybody knows what happened during Katrina and stuff. And just crazy to think where that thing came from and where it is to now is just, it's very something. It's something really good to appreciate for sure. So,
yeah.
Good question, David. So look forward to seeing more. And obviously we'll be away, so we won't get to see too much of it. But I expect to get some picture updates from the team or from the construction work and all that other stuff that'll be coming, I'm sure, sooner rather than later.
And there's also the open practice at the Superdome the week of that Titans game when they return. So there might be a little bit of an opportunity for some fans that attend that to get a little bit of an early look too.
Yeah, we definitely didn't talk about training camp schedule. Obviously was out and stuff, and so I think by my count it's 23 practices, and then when they come home, they haven't said anything about fans in California. As far as I would tell you guys, I wouldn't count on it unless they open it up like at the last minute, but it does not sound like that at the moment. But when they do come back, they're opening up Tulane. Over there, they're going to make sure to have a practice at Ullman Stadium, and then they're going to have the open practice at the Superdome, which had a really good turnout. I remember the last time they did that. I don't remember. It was last year. Was it last year?
Yeah, it was last year.
Or was it the year before? It's pretty cool. Good thing to see for sure. But, training camp, it's going to be starting on the 24th, all the practices. And then, again, we'll be out there. We got some off days and stuff. We'll get all that stuff, information to you. We plan on going live after every practices and all that fun stuff. We're going to be busy people, Ross. We're going to be super busy because obviously we got locked on and we got our writing aspect that we got to do Saints news. So, hey, it's the fun time of the year though, right? I mean, I don't know. I think it's the precursor leading up to the regular season. And once we're back in season mode, like it just is another element where you get like in this rhythm and stuff. And I don't know. I just have a fun appreciation for being able to get back in that rhythm a little bit.
Yeah, same.
Man.
For sure.
All right, so let's keep going with some of these training camp questions. So we talked about Alvin Kamara. We knew that that's going to be obviously one of the biggest storylines. I think when you look at, if you want to priority rank them, you could do that. But I think the biggest other questions is the offensive line, right? I think, what does that look like? How does that progress? And I'm kind of jumbling some of these together. And what's the future with Taliese Fuaga? Are they going to keep him at left tackle? Is Trevor Penning going to be the right tackle? Who comes in at left guard? Is it Nick Salaveri? Is it a Lucas Patrick? We'll finally get to see Oli Udoh. Is he going to threaten for a roster spot or starting spot? He should make the roster. But, the offensive line, we've said it probably since day one with this Kubiak offense is if they don't have a good offensive line, this offense is not going to work. They're not going to be able to run the football. They're not going to be able to protect Derek Carr. They're not going to be able to do what they need to do to be able to do it. And so what's your take on the offensive line and kind of where you feel like, is this maybe the next priority to answer for this team, or is it something else?
No, I think this is the next priority because, as you mentioned, like this team's offense goes by the way of its offensive line in 2024, not just from a protecting Derek Carr standpoint, but this is an offense that wants to be predicated on its run game. So they have to have a major presence in terms of what that run game is. And it's not going to be your typical block the guy in front of you type of run game. It's going to be climbing to the second level, climbing to the third levels, moving off the ball, like all these other things. It's just so much that's going to be kind of demanded of that offensive line that they'll have to come through for. And look, I don't think that there's the thing that makes it so challenging. The reason why it's a question is not because we're doubting it, or that anybody's doubting it. It's the question is because it's a majority unknown. You've got three unknown commodities stepping in to be a part of your offensive line. Even if you have a veteran stepping in at left guard, it's still going to end up being a question mark because he's still going to be new to the system, new to this offense. And so I think that becomes one of the biggest pieces to it is how do you make sure when you're relying on young players, new faces to drive your improvement, how are you fortifying that improvement? How are you fortifying the foundation to make it easier for those guys to be able to pick up on, well down the road, as opposed, hit the ground running, if you will, as opposed to having to kind of get their feet up under them and all that. So I think that's the reason why we're asking the question about the offensive line. It's not really a question of doubt. It's just a question of question, because right now it's just unproven. So it's going to be very interesting to see the way that it all, that offensive line comes together, how long it takes, all that. But I agree with you. I do think that the offense goes by the way of this offensive line in 2024. And it is the next biggest priority behind Alvin Kamara.
Right. And I think when you look at the offensive line too, we know that, and we said it, they're not going to make it 18 weeks. They're just not going to make it the full 17 games. So your reserves have to be just as good, be able to step in a pinch and do that. And so I think they've got some veterans that are familiar with the system that can obviously help with that. If it's not a Lucas Patrick starting, or if it's a Shane Lemieux or Udo that we talk about, or Landon Young, who always is a versatile type of guy. I mean, when we kind of toyed around with the early final roster, which again, go back and check that episode out, because that's probably going to be the roster. No, I'm just kidding. But it's one of those things when you look at it. Yeah, we got it. We got them. And so when you look at it, I mean, it has to work. And I don't expect it to come out of the gate looking great. You know what I mean? I expect them to stumble a little bit. But man, this is the ultimate, like, I don't want to say risk reward, but if this hits, like if Fuaga is your either tackle, if he's your left tackle, if Penning is your right tackle and can play well, and let's just say Saldiveri is your left guard, that's 3 players that have 3 years or less of experience. I'm not saying it's the Lions offensive line, but that's a really good building block when you add in Eric McCoy and Cesar Ruiz. That's the reward here, is if it works together, we know Fuaga is going to start. Like, that's not a question. So really, we have 2 spots. It's just a question: is Fuaga going to keep playing at left tackle, or is he going to move to right tackle? Do you have a preference? Because Fuaga, that's a rookie protecting the blind side for Derek Carr, or do you think he's more suited to go back to right tackle? Because team believes, they said they know he can play right tackle, so they're trying to get him some work at left tackle.
Yeah, I don't have a preference right now. I would have to see it during training camp, a few of those padded practices, things like that. I think we'll start to answer a little bit more of those questions, because I think in either way, you're assuming a risk. You're assuming the risk of Trevor Penning not developing at left tackle. You're assuming the risk of a rookie holding down left tackle. In Fuaga's case, it's tricky. It's really, really tricky. So I think you have to get as much information as possible before hitting preference or hitting a stride in terms of which one of those guys might end up stepping into that way. So I would say right now, John, I don't have a preference, but I'm sure I'll develop that preference over the course of seeing them in training camp. Are you kind of in the same boat there, or do you see it differently?
Yeah, I think, and as part of the other question, since we're talking about the offensive line, we should get an update, hopefully, on Ryan Ramczyk. I expect him to be on at least PUP. Like, that's going to be probably a given that he's going to be on the PUP list. Him and Tano are probably going to be on that physically unable to perform list. But I would like to know, I guess, the definitive, because I don't expect us to see Ryan Ramczyk at all. If he shows up by some chance, then I'd be really surprised. But, again, he's not in the picture. And so right tackle, that right side, I think, you look at some of the tendencies they are trying in practice. I don't want to say they were favoring that right side a little bit more, but you saw a lot of plays that were designed to go to that side. And I'm not saying that's what their tendency is going to be, but, I like the concept of Fuaga. And I think maybe they're thinking that, okay, look at his lack of pressures that he allowed in college. Hopefully that can translate to the next level. And, you're up against a really good rusher off the edge if you're protecting that blind side. I think with Penning, one of the things that he's always talked about is his feet and, his footwork and his hand placement and stuff. And so I'm not saying right tackle is easier to play, because there's no position that's like easy to play in the NFL, but Penning probably could look at right tackle and be fine, be okay. I just, you're going to have some growing pains with Fuaga no matter what, right? I don't know that it's going to be left or right. I don't necessarily have a preference. I think they drafted him with the vision of being their right tackle, and I think he could be the right tackle and probably should be the right tackle. But do you kind of sacrifice all this progress or things that you've done with Trevor Penning and just move him back over to the left side and see if he gets it or he doesn't, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tough one to figure out because you're either sacrificing that, or not a tough one to figure out, right? It'll be easy to figure out when you have all the information, but it's a tough one to balance in terms of the information gathering because you're either sacrificing all of the progress that you have made with Penning, or you're sacrificing the potential and the readiness of Taliese Fuaga by moving him over to the opposite side. So I think that the big key here is John Benton is the offensive line coach.
Yeah.
Does having the new offensive line coach and the new offensive system means that does that mean that the progress that was made with Trevor Penning is now more easily sacrificed because you're teaching everybody something new and there's a new teacher in the building who has a very different style and very different approach that Doug Marrone had? Does that end up making it a little bit easier a pill to swallow to say, you know what, we'll sacrifice the progress so far, because the progress that he had so far doesn't really apply to what's happening entirely now. Like some of it is you can sacrifice it and still be able to pick it up. And then that would then make the readiness of Taliese Fuaga a little more sacrificeable also, because again, you're teaching him something brand new one way or another, whether he's staying at right tackle or he's moving over to left tackle. So I think that's something that maybe teeters a little bit based upon what John Benton brings to the table, what the new offensive system brings to the table. And real quick, just because I don't want to move on without mentioning it, speaking of left guards, I want to give a quick shout out to former left guard James Hurst, who's now a part of the WDSU sports team, which is awesome. Really cool, because we all knew that he had a future in media. He's like one of the smartest dudes, everything. And so it's just cool. It's awesome to see it happen for him immediately. And congrats to James. That's awesome.
Yeah, no doubt. I remember when he retired, it was tough, you know, but it was coming, and he's one of the best guys in the locker room, always made himself available, always talked to us no matter what. And, you know, he had a good pulse on things. And man, I know he loved his time in New Orleans. I know he loved it in Baltimore too, but you know, he talks about his journey, how he got to the Saints and everything. And the Saints really believed in him for a lot of things. And congrats to James. I think he's absolutely going to do well with WDSU and that team. So it's you know, it's tall order to fill shoes like of Lance Moore, but I think he'll be just fine. So Lance, another good guy too.
You better come with the suits the way that Lance did, though. I gotta say that.
Yeah, man. Lance had them fire
clean, James.
Yeah. I think he'll be just fine. But you know, and I think the offensive line, that's one thing. And again, I just think with Trevor Penning, because we've talked about him, is, you know, he's got a clean slate, but I'm also curious to see how long does that last, right? Because if he looks sluggish to start, if it's not coming together, are they going to be patient here? Or are they going to do like what they did last year and just be like, all right, well, you had your shot. We just don't feel like you're coming along, you're doing this. And then it's like, okay, now you're bust, right? And hopefully it doesn't come to that. But I do know the coaching that he's done, or that John Benton's done there, and the stuff that he did at the offensive line camp in the offseason and stuff, and in some of his offseason training, like he's about as prepared as you think he should be probably at this point. And so I'd like to give him the benefit of the doubt, but look, we've talked about this team. Show me, right? Show me. I don't want to hear about the talk. It's great. It's nice. It's fun, but show me that you are a different team. And I think that's a big thing for the Saints offensive line. Let me get this one, since we were talking about the offensive line. We could probably talk about the offensive line for the whole rest of the show. That's a good one. If Fuaga, Saldivari, McCoy, Ruiz, Penning are not the starting offensive line, front office and company have failed 3 number ones, a second round, high fourth he traded up for. I mean, that's valid for sure. This was the question. Can you compare Penning, Saldivari, McCoy, Ruiz, Fuaga on paper to Pete, Hurst, McCoy, Ruiz, and Young at the end of 2023? It's a good question because they played pretty good down the stretch. But, you know, are you taking last year's offensive line at this point, or do you think this is turning a new page because their new offensive scheme? I think that's the big point.
Right.
Here.
Yeah, it's not even the same game plan. Like my answer was going to be no, I can't compare them because they're literally entirely different game plans being asked to. I will say that I might look at Fuaga, Saldiveri, McCoy, Ruiz, and Penning as maybe being more athletic a group than Pete, Hurst, McCoy, Ruiz, and Young were. I might say that this younger core is maybe a little bit more athletic, but that's really the best I could do in terms of any comparison. Otherwise, like everything, literally everything's different. The people are different, the system is different, the style is different, what they're being asked to do is different. So I wouldn't spend too much time trying to compare the two. You just kind of have to see what this new line is going to look like.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, I mean, this is kind of what we would talk about. Like, do they add free agents? Yeah. I mean, they could add to the O line. There are still guys out there, you know, David Bakhtiari is still obviously a big commodity. I mean, he's going to land somewhere. I don't think it's the Saints, right? But I don't know if that's a really fit, even though it could work. But I don't know. They're going to add to the offensive line. I just don't think it's going to be splash guys that you think so. I do think they want to see what they got in some of these undrafted rookies, like your Kyle Hergels or your Nuri Newili. You got some of those guys, or Mark Evans, what you got with him in his second year. And so I think you're going to give these guys a shot, right? And, you know, it's a tough business because you kind of got to do what you got to do. And the offensive line, you got to carry so many to be able to make it through training camp, and injuries unfortunately are part of the game and they happen. But, you know, if they're in a pinch, guys that were on the team last year that are unsigned, you know, those are guys that you probably would look at, make quick calls to. You know, I don't know where some of these other veterans are going to end up landing, but, you know, those are guys that you probably have on a quick call list if that happens. But, you know, I do like the fact that it's a little bit younger of a look. And I think we've said this about the team is it's kind of like a little bit younger of a look, even though they do have older players, but getting a little bit younger at backup quarterback, actually a lot younger at backup quarterback, getting younger on the offensive line, you know, getting a little bit younger at receiver in certain, you know, positions and stuff. And so, Trey Turner was the one that I thought about, Rose City. I mean, it was a guy that, but I haven't heard anything specific. It's a lot of these guys aren't going to sign until the next, you know, couple of weeks. Some people up until training camp. And so, look, I think he's somebody to keep an eye out on. You know, just because his whole Saints tenure lasted less than a week,
right?
A couple days.
Yeah, it stunk, man. But there's also like some reunions. Guys like Max Garcia are still out there. Dron Cage still out there. All that. To your point about getting younger, the thing that's really interesting to me is that the Saints got younger in terms of their starting offensive line, but then got more experience when it comes to their depth, which I think was a wise move. And I think that that's something that's worth highlighting too, to where if, you know, like we mentioned before, you're not going to get all 17 games out of your 5 offensive linemen. You're going to need to replace 1 or 2 for some number of games. And so having the veteran guys you're able to lean on for your depth, whereas in the past they were leaning on the young guys for their depth, I think is a welcome shift and change in philosophy and roster building approach too.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, again, this offensive line, it's going to go under the microscope. And again, I don't know if we look at training camp and the practices that obviously, you know, we're going to see good things, but, you know, if Granderson keeps winning his one-on-ones, or if, you know, Chase Young, when he's out there and if he's starting to win those one-on-ones against Penning, you know, people are going to make it the conclusions. They're going to just jump to the conclusions. Right. And I don't know. How much stock do you put in that? That's another thing. Is like, if Granderson continues to whip up on like Fuaga, do you put a lot of stock in that? Or if it's a Chase Young on the opposite side, it's working Trevor Penning, how much stock of that do you put into practices? And we talked about this, where the practices were more valuable in your opinion versus the actual preseason games. I remember, go back on past episodes because we did talk about that, but what's your take?
Yeah, I think I want to see it go back and forth. I think the issue becomes if it's too much of one over the other. I think ideally what you're seeing is the offensive line win some of those padded practices and the defensive line win some of those padded practices. What I probably wouldn't overdo is if in the, you know, shirts and shells days and things like that, that the defensive line is whooping up on the offensive line. I couldn't care less. Like in those situations, for me, then it becomes about, was the offensive lineman where they were supposed to be? Did they execute well? Did they hit where they were supposed, you know, did they hit their landmark? All this other stuff. That's really more of what I'd be looking for in that. But when it comes to those padded practices, whatever number of those that there are, I can't remember the count off the top of my head. But whatever number of those are, if those split evenly, then that's where I think you're in your best situation, because it means that your offensive line and your defensive line consistently challenge one another as opposed to one dominating the other. And that's really what you want to see. And then holding up well in those joint practices against San Francisco.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it's they record every practice. They're gonna watch the film on it. The players have to watch the film on it. They're gonna find out for sure. And so we're going to get tons of information. And it's funny. Jerry asked the question: do you think the Saints and Who Dat Nation should ignore the media every day talking down on us? I don't know if you're saying local media, but I do know, and it kind of coincides with this about where the Saints are viewed this year. And I think there's some validity to it, but I think people are being a little bit too harsh on the team in some aspects. I still think this can be a competitive team. I don't see them turning in like a 4 to 6 win season. I mean, if they do, then everybody's going to probably be fired. But I just, they don't care about what national media says, right?
Yeah.
Like Dennis Allen's already said this. He doesn't care what anybody says. I think a lot of players, they may listen to it, but they don't care. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
the people in the building, they're focused about, that's all that they care about. So,
right.
I mean,
I mentioned the Locked On Saints the other day that like sometimes when it comes to the national media, it's consistency of the narrative more than it is actual analysis and evaluation.
totally.
And so when you have a popular media person who comes out and says, I don't like the way that the New Orleans Saints handle their salary cap, they can't, because of the consistency of the narrative, they can't then turn around and say, I think that the Saints are going to be a winning team in 2024. So you make the one early opinion, and then based on the one early opinion, you're stuck having to kind of follow this through line the whole way through. And that to me is something that I think we see a lot within national media coverage. Whereas when you get more nuanced looks and things like that, hey, here's why the Saints are doing what they're doing. Here's how it works. Here's what they think they're trying to achieve. Here's what they're thinking when they're making these decisions, all that. It allows you a little bit more of the flexibility of being able to say, I'm not necessarily sure that this is the greatest approach, but here's why they do it. And here's what they hope that turns into, which is, I think, a little bit more something that is more better befits educating a fan base. Whereas like in the national media sort of situation, you end up running into those situations where it's like, well, we've already developed this opinion about this thing, so I can't possibly be on the other side 4 months later on this other side of it. And I think that becomes a bit of a challenge. It's one of the reasons why I have no interest in working nationally at all. Zero interest.
I mean,
working nationally.
and you guys can tell when you look at somebody that like walks down a depth chart or preview and they don't even know the right people, right? Like they just don't know. And it's not a shot at those guys, but I mean, when you're national, you're covering 32 teams. And so even the guys that cover the NFC South, like some of them do a good job for sure, but you're pretty much tied to one team, right? I mean, you're kind of checking on the other guys. And I mean, it's a thing. It's a thing that people talk about. And I know that everybody under the sun, when it comes to the Saints, the salary cap thing is one thing. Now with this NFL and the streaming video rights and all this other stuff, like the Sunday ticket stuff, that could throw a monkey wrench in some things. But still, the Saints continually have found a way. And we've talked about the salary cap strategy. If it works, nobody cares. It's when it doesn't work and all this other stuff is happening that now people have an opinion and now they feel justified because the approach doesn't work. But I can tell you the way that guys like Mickey think, or if I can get somebody locked up now for this dollar amount, that dollar amount down the road for a few years is going to be 3 or 4 times the amount of what you're looking at. So it's just, it's also some economics. It's some mathematics or luminomics, whatever you want to call us. I call it lumisnomics or luminomics. That's the easiest one. But and then Kai Harley just working his magic with the numbers and stuff. And so I mean, it riles up everybody, and it's just fascinating to see sites, and I'm not going to name them, but sites that continue to put out like the Marshawn Lattimore trade stuff. Like, come on, stop! Like, like we're past that. We're moving on. Like, but it still comes up, and it's still a thing, and fans are eating it up. Like it's taken as reality, and that's the thing I have a problem with. And so, But anyways, off the soapbox for sure. And we'll talk more about training camp for sure. Anything you want to do, any direction you want to go? Because I got one in the chat that I would probably say we could segue to. Talking about, we talk about rookies. So obviously we're 2 weeks away. in rookies report in a week. Any particular, like who's on our rookie radar list, whether it's drafted, undrafted? I think Fuaga is probably an obvious choice.
Right.
Spencer Rattler's probably the second choice, and maybe. But I don't know if I'd stay stack rank them, but let's run down some of the rookies who you want to see the most of, and what's kind of their outlook, I guess I would say.
Bub means.
Bub means.
Yeah. Bub means the big one for me, man. Like I think the team should have made a bigger deal out of that draft pick. The way that analysts, the way that scouts, the way that his collegiate teammates, the way that his collegiate coaches, the way that the people around him, the way that the fans, like the way that people talk about Bub Means is not consistent with the way that the New Orleans Saints have talked about Bub Means. And I think that's really interesting. They've kind of talked about him as like being very concerned with like pumping the brakes. Hey, look, he's a young guy. And I get all that. That is the sensible thing to do. I understand it. I'm not actually even really criticizing it, but I do think that Bub Means coming in could be a bigger deal than just, he's a young rookie that's got to get things figured out. And that might translate in 2024. That might not translate until 2025, whatever it might be. But 6'1", 200 plus pounds, good route runner, even though he didn't get to run a ton of routes during his time in Pitt, asked to do the same like 5 or 6 things the entire time that he was there at Pitt and did them, and kind of had that impact of like, oh, well, he's going to run this, but then they still couldn't stop him from doing it, kind of a thing. He had that tush push about him in that way. And so like, I love like the attitude that he brings. He has the developmental piece attitude. He just soaks everything up, loves being in a room. He just feels like a dude that like, I would put the camera in his face a little bit more. I would be making a bigger deal about what he has the potential to be if I were the New Orleans Saints. So I'm really excited to see him come training camp and the way that he ends up fitting in.
Yeah, I'm with you. And Pitt didn't have a good year, right? They were 3-9. So when you don't have a good year, it's kind of hard to put your best stuff out there too, when it comes to collegiate tape and stuff like that. But again, he has the opportunity to make this roster. I think he should, because I don't think you're going to pass him through waivers or anything. But it's the question we talked about: do they keep 5? Do they keep 6? Is it do you give Equanimeous St. Brown the boot, or do you keep Cedric Wilson on because of the way he's able to go and be their slot guy? Is A.T. Perry going to make the push? I mean, there is something exciting to be said, but I would say Bub Means, in his ability and his willingness to do these special teams and drills and all this other stuff, gunner, jammer, all those types of things, that's going to go to his favor. I mean, this is a dude who just loves to play football. Like, I mean, I get it. Like, people, yes, that's your dream, but we said it plenty of times, but I don't think he has a bad day. I don't think so. Like, it's just rare. Like, he's just generally a pleasant dude to interact with, and you see it out on the field. We've pointed out how he interacts with Keith Williams, the wide receivers coach. I mean, there's just something to be said about how exciting he can be. And, I think he's obviously on the radar. And I mean, shoot, all the rookies are going to be, but I think you're right. That is a special elevation, especially because it's the offense, right? And, of course, Fuaga is a given. McKinstry, Kool-Aid McKinstry, of course, we want to see him. Like, I
can't wait to see him.
Pretty dang good. And so again, first to second round pick, we know that, right? And I don't want to discount Kool-Aid, but when you talk about Bub Means or Spencer Rattler, Christian Boyd, or Jalen Ford and Josiah Ziram, I mean, these are guys that you want to see more of. I'm excited to see Jalen Ford. I think I just have a hunch about him that he's going to carve a role on special teams and sneak in somehow. I just think he could do that. And
I'm with you on that.
Of course, Spencer Rattler. I mean, we know that. That's one of the questions we ask. Is he going to legitimately challenge Jake Haener? I think he can. I think people need to walk it down that he's going to end up being the backup, because he's got a lot to learn as a rookie. Like, he's good. He's confident. He's progressed well. But don't forget about Jake Haener. I mean, it's going to come down to not only practice, but the preseason. And we talked about it. Haener didn't have a good preseason, but he had good practices. And so, in your opinion, like based on what you said, that would be a good success. And so the Saints fans are going to be able to see the team this year, because This 49ers game is nationally televised. They're going to carry, I think, the first one, or no, the last one against the Titans. They're going to broadcast that one on NFL Network. So I think the Cardinals one is the only one you don't get to see if you're out of market. But I again, Christian Boyd, he can be DT4. I mean, that's a given. It's a pathway for most of these guys. And then when you talk about undrafted rookies, there's so many good ones that we have just talked endlessly about. I want to see what Jermaine Jackson can do. Can he make this roster? I don't know. It's an uphill battle for somebody like him. And Mason Tipton, same thing, an uphill battle. But if they come to work, they come do things that they're supposed to and adapt to the coaching, I think they could find themselves it really hard at final cuts. But you're talking about these practice squad priority guys too.
Yeah, I think a big one for me is Dallin Holker, of course. Dallin walking in and having that really kind of impressive OTA mini camp and all that. I mean, just a dude that can run a route, a dude that has like this insane arm length that really opens up his catch radius, despite the fact that he's 6'3" at the position, all that. I think there's value there. I'd throw Miller Bradford out there too. I mean, the dude had four interceptions during
he had a hope.
like
he had a bunch.
Yeah, I mean, the guy
just kept getting them.
Like he was just, I mean, just a playmaker. And I think that's an element that you want on your defense. And I know that's something that a guy like Marcus Robertson loves having in that safety room, and a guy like Joe Woods and Dennis Allen love having in that safety room. And so I'll be really interested to see the two of them in particular as well. And then we mentioned a couple of the other guys too, like, how does Kyle Hergel look? There's a few of these other guys in the trenches that could potentially end up carving themselves out, practice squad role, and then effectively a contributor role at some point from that, based on injury, things like that could potentially take place.
Yeah, defensively, Kyler Ball on the interior, Trajan Jeffcoat on the edge, as long as we're not seeing some fights, that
Right.
was so random. But hey, you know what?
Nowhere,
I mean, I did. Usually you get some things that come up, but he's one. Isaiah Stallberg, Rico Payton in the back end as well. I mean, these are other guys. And of course, Matt Hayball challenging Lou Hedley. I mean, we praised how much Lou Hedley looked, how good he looked during OTA's minicamp. It wasn't 100% consistent, but it's noticeably improved, and so that'll be fun to watch. And then if Charlie Smith can push Blake Grupe, I don't think we're at that point yet, but it could be that way. But I like the core nucleus of rookies and undrafted rookies. Like I think, although the Saints take a lot of shots, right, and some deservedly so, over the past several years, I really do like the young players, whether it's undrafted or drafted players that they've just brought in. Like, I just do.
Agreed.
Like, I think it's a better, not saying that it's 2017 vibes or anything like that, but I just think what we don't really see is they have built a pretty good base. And so I think that, it's on them to obviously progress and develop, but the potential's there. And, at least some of these guys on paper could do something, but training camp was going to tell us everything we need to know. It just will.
Yep.
All right. So and again, we're at that point where we just kind of like talk about everything without talking about everything, so it's always just a good one. I'm going to shift gears, and James said something about Donovan Smith. I mean, that's obviously a possibility, a veteran guy like that. When we're talking about the offensive line, just talking about the back end real quick. We've talked about Johnathan Abram, excuse me, and Jordan Howden. And so it's kind of ties into the free agency talk, I guess, is why I'm bringing this question up is, are they going to add to the room? We've talked Justin Simmons since January, I think, or January, February, whenever the HBCU Bowl was. And, it's possible, right? I think they want to get this thing done with Alvin first, probably, to figure out where things are going, and then maybe try to add to it. Does Jimmy Graham left the ball in the Saints court? Does he make a comeback too for this offense, especially because Juwan Johnson's not going to be, shouldn't be ready by the start of training camp. We pretty much expect that.
Right.
But, safety group, we've talked about this before. Howden wasn't playing because of the offseason surgery he was recovering from. But, Abram, I think he's extremely talented, smart. I know we talked to Marcus Robertson and that he thinks the world of him. They think the world of Jordan Howden too. We've kind of told
Yep.
you guys that, they have a vision for him this year to play more in the box. He's going to be the extra dime back probably, but Abram is capable, but when we have our pick, if they can get Justin Simmons, I think that's the best course of action. But this secondary still is one of the strengths of this team for sure. When you look at corner and safety, no matter what.
Yeah, without a doubt, it's the strongest in the division too. If you ask me, when it comes to that, when it comes to the secondary, and so I think that looking at where a guy like Abram really sets himself apart, it's the way that he worked with Tyrann Mathieu. I mean, he like some of it isn't necessarily like it's not always just about like this player versus this player. It's this player next to this player or this player next to this player, and how those things can be different, in certain situations. And so I think that with the way that Jordan Howden and Tyrann Mathieu played so well next to one another at the end of the season last year, the Saints aren't going to forget that. And so I absolutely see Abram being the guy whose job it is to lose next to Tyrann Mathieu, and then continuing to see Jordan Howden play that dime back role and get more of that experience in the box, as you mentioned, and then eventually step into a future safety role on this team, whether it's that strong safety playing down at the box or the free safety playing in the post. I think in any of those situations, or in either of those situations, he'll be more ready with another year of moving about and kind of being where he's needed in 2024. So I would expect it to be the case, but I'm not going to be surprised if Jordan Howden at least makes the conversation interesting. I'll say that much,
Sure.
because there were moments where he made the him and Marcus May conversation interesting in his rookie year last year, when they basically just said, dude, go out there and play. And everything. Right. And so, I think like that, I give him the benefit of the doubt there for sure.
Yeah, and I think the big thing to think about with Abram and Mathieu, they have some excellent communication, and obviously that matters when you're playing the safety position. It's right. Football 101. Of course, you want to communicate, but having that, being on the same page when you're having so many different offensive looks thrown at you and being able to make plays, I mean, that just doesn't happen by mistake. I mean, you study film, you pump, and Abram. Right. Put in a lot of film last year, right? He was working on the tablet, and they said that he was putting in the most. And so again, I don't think it's by a chance that he did what he did out on the field. And so it's the safety group is obviously one that we want to watch. We want to see how Alontae Taylor comes along in the slot. His second year, we talked about Joe Woods and kind of his assessment, saying he didn't really do him any favors last year in coaching, which I thought was nice, right. But Alontae still was top 10 in the league in passes defended, right? He's tied for 9th with Isaac Yiadom. And so, I mean, he learned his lesson.
One of the best press corners last year too.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there's definitely some things to take away. And Alontae is going to probably see a lot of time on the field, but Kool-Aid McKinstry is going to get in there, and maybe he dips into that as well. But that's secondary, man. That's the strength. And that's one area that they couldn't deserve to fall off. Getting Marshawn back was so big for this team. I'm excited to see him. Super excited to see him in training camp. And he's him and Adebo, man. Adebo's in that contract year. And that was another question I asked, is if we see him get an extension before week 1, and the Saints have done those types of things before. I don't want to let him, hit the market personally, because I think Adebo is low key. He's slept on. People don't talk much about him, and Marshawn wants to get back to elite form, but Paulson Adebo, man, he plays lights out. And the Saints had a bunch of turnovers. They had a lot of success, and a lot of it had to do with number 29 for sure.
Big time for sure. I think it'll be interesting too to see if maybe they end up giving him one of those in-season extensions. They did that with Granderson last year. It was the Green Bay game. He got his extension. Green Bay game that opened the season in Jacksonville for Marshawn Lattimore's extension. DeMario got one of his right before, or at least the news of it broke on the broadcast right before the Raiders game a few years ago, the inaugural game at their stadium over there too. So we see stuff like that all the time. And so it'll be interesting to see if maybe Adebo's that guy this year.
Yeah. I think he can. And I think he's more than capable. He knows what's at stake, and the Saints need him to play up a level. And, I don't think there's anything to suggest that he would fall off. Right. And injuries is the only thing that could hurt most of these players. Right. Yeah. And so
true for everybody. Right.
Yeah. It is. And so, the other question I had is, how do we keep seeing this Klint Kubiak offense evolve? Because, man, we have seen so much. Like day one,
So
we were impressed, right? Like day one, we're just kind of like, huh? Because it was just refreshing to see certain things and elements that just weren't a part of the old offenses. And so, I mean, hit me with it, Ross. What more are we gonna maybe expect from this Klint Kubiak offense?
Yeah, one of the things I'm most interested to see is do we still see motion almost every single play? I mean,
Yeah.
goodness, like there was so much of that going on, and like there's certain things that we know. Like the guys over at Underdog Fantasy did some really fantastic research where they talked about how motion increases a wide receiver's per route run production by about 10%. Play action increases their per route run production by about 20%, and things like that. And those are all elements that we saw a lot of all throughout mini camps, OTAs, all that. We saw different variations of play action, whether they be basic play action, boots, rollouts, waggles, things like that. We saw a lot of different motion that was at the snap, i.e., the player was still in motion when the ball was snapped. We saw variations of the motion where they got settled before the ball was snapped. Both of those things have different impacts on defenses, all that, to give you different pieces of information as an offense. I mean, there's so much to all of that comes through, but then there's still other things that we don't know yet. What's going to be the running back approach in terms of the committee approach? Is it a full committee? Is it a 60% AK, then 20% and 20%? Like, is there still like a lot more Alvin Kamara than the other guys, or is it the full committee approach? Are we going to see the Taysom Hill power runs and the RPOs and all that? Taysom Hill was one of the best RPO players in the league last year. Do we see more of that here in 2024? So there's like so many of those things. And then on top of all that, John, two names we haven't mentioned yet, Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. How are they utilized beyond just the standard lineup, snap the ball, run a route, catch a football? And look, they're really good at the standard lineup, snap the ball, run a route, catch a football. They're really good at that part. But is there more that you can do with Rashid Shaheed? Is there more that you can do with Chris Olave? And in those two wide receiver sets, which are going to be really prevalent in this offense now, you need those guys operating at max capacity. So how does this system get that out of them? There's so many different things, all of it. And that was without even really like diving into the Alvin Kamara of it all in terms of usage and everything like that. But man, there's just so much that this offense has the ability and capability to add and do to make things really, really challenging for a defense that lines up on the other side.
Yeah, assuming Kamara, everything's good to go, which I don't think there's anything that should suggests that it shouldn't, but still think
Right.
50 to 60% of the snaps. I think Kendre Miller probably is 25%. You'll get Jamal maybe about 20% as well. And Taysom's going to be in on that. I think he's going to be doing. I think
Yep.
Taysom could dip into that target share. Maybe he gets 10%
Oh,
at tailback, or something along that lines. Where they at least design those plays like that. But the offensive line is still the key there. I'm glad you brought up Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave because, woo, I got a flaming hot Cheetos take or a Andy's hot fries take from Hootie Juice that I'm just gonna put up here.
Oh,
I mean, just
hoodie.
look at it.
Oh, hoodie.
Rashid Shaheed will have a better season than Chris Olave because the Klint Kubiak offense will utilize him in a lot more different ways for him to succeed. I think the second part is absolutely true that they're going to find some creative looks to use. And I think this goes back to one of the things I said about Kubiak's offense when I was watching some of the Minnesota film is, the way they use Justin Jefferson and
Yeah.
you put Shaheed in that backfield and suddenly he becomes a weapon. You're just like, I don't know where this guy's going. And he uses his speed. Like, I do think that he's in for a big year. And with the two receivers, those two, Olave and Shaheed, they're the biggest constant staples that are going to be on the Saints offense. We know that they're going to have
Yeah.
successful seasons. It's just a question mark of who are the other guys that are going to do. Is it a Cedric Wilson from the slot? Is it going to be Bub Means? Is it going to be Equinemius St. Brown? Is it going to be A.T. Perry? I mean, those are the things that we are going to want to see because obviously there's no Michael Thomas in this picture, but that's a heck of a take. Who did you? I mean, that's a heck of a one. If you feel that confident, I'd say go to Vegas and put one down on it. But that's a big one for sure. So
Yeah, for real.
man,
No,
oh
but
man,
I love it. I mean, like there should be excitement around these guys. Like that's the
yeah,
thing that I'm garnering
yeah,
from all of this is that there's so much excitement around Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, and there absolutely should be. Like there's so much that these guys are gonna be able to do. And then with an offense that's predicated on its run game, the better the run game is, the better their passing game gets. And especially in situations where your run game is operating well enough that you're winning on first and second downs and you're not having to throw on these 3rd and 10, 3rd and long situations. And there's so much more that you can create, that you can do creatively, that you can create and execute, that you can innovate with. There's just so much of that. Like the Saints, I think Derek Carr was sacked the vast majority of his times that he was sacked last year, which wasn't as much as people will have you believe, by the way,
Right.
was on 3rd down. I mean, 3rd down was where he was sacked the absolute most, because they were in so many of those 3rd and long situations because of the inefficiency of the run game. And so I think some of that is a lot of different factors in terms of why the run game didn't work. But if the run game works this year, then it puts you in better situations in 3rd down, creates better situations for you to be able to continue to move the ball with that offense.
Oh, please, with the run game work. Please. I mean, and you know, everybody, if you've been tuning in for more than 5 minutes, you know that I wanted to see this offense. That's really all I care about, right? And so that's my biggest thing. And somebody asked about target share. I think Olave is going to get well over 125. I think Rashid's probably close to that 100 target range. But
yeah, it's close.
you know, they've
90,
preached
80.
the information. They've preached, you know, that they want to be a run first team, right? And so I think Taysom's going to be a big part of that. Alvin's going to be a big part of that. But when you're running, when you're doing play action, when you're doing motion, it's going to open things up. So Derek Carr might not have the crazy stats that he did before, you know, or some of the things in some of those games. Like down the stretch, I know some of those games were like the Rams game was mainly garbage time, right? But those last 6-7 games, like he was pretty darn good if you look at his numbers. I mean, this is just it's hard to ignore that version of Derek Carr could be what the Saints get this year, but he doesn't have to be that guy if they can get the run game going too.
Yeah. And then you look back at the Patriots game where you know, they started using a lot of motion. They started using a lot of that. Then all of a sudden, like you saw what they were able to do with that too. And look, I know the Patriots are not a good football team. I get that, but neither. I mean, we weren't sure if the Saints were at that point in the season either.
Right.
At that point, and so they had to go out there and win that game. And then all of a sudden, the motion showed up. Then it went away again. But all of a sudden, the motion showed up, and then you were able to see all the value of it. So, like, I think that we saw it late in the season. We saw it early in the season. We saw it at different points of the season. But I think it's the consistency, letting it be a part of your DNA, letting it be a part of your identity. And that benefits the playmakers on a more consistent basis because they're more consistently put in position to make plays and to succeed.
Yep, consistency was the name of the game. That's it.
Yeah.
Is be consistent in how you use Taysom Hill, when you use him, and how you do it. Be consistent with your play calling. I mean, I know Kubiak is a guy that's confident. I know he's going to be able to run things the way that he should in this offense, and so you shouldn't see where Taysom doesn't get a touch until the second or third quarter, you know, or he's just not getting involved in the offense. And I'm working on a piece where I'm actually looking at his numbers and all of his production in games where it was 40% of snaps or more. It makes up like 85% of his numbers in like 7 or 8 games. It's ridiculous how much production. Some of it's 90% of stuff. And so, I mean,
it's so wild because like so much of the excuses for it were like, oh, well, game situation dictated games. Like Taysom Hill should be a part of every one of your game situations. Like there's like every game situation is Taysom Hill situation. Like, what are we doing? You know what I mean? Like, get the ball in the hands of your best playmakers. Get the ball in the hands of your best players. And above all else, above the motion, above the play action, above the 2 wide receivers sets, the zone run, the outside runs, also above all of that, just get your playmakers in position to make plays and put your players in position to do what it is that they do best. If this offense and this system can do that this year on a more consistent basis, that makes the world of difference from the very beginning.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, it's simple. I mean, it sounds simple, but of course it takes a village, and you got to go in, and all the frameworks started, and now you get into training camp, which is going to be a lot more of the heavy lifting, and in preseason, you hopefully put it together. I don't expect to see a lot of them in the preseason, you know, just because, you know, certain things are happening, but I do think, you know, that's a good question. How much of this Kubiak offense, like, do you think we're going to get like kind of the baseline, or do you think that's still going to be kind of the staple where we see maybe what the Saints offense could look like with Rattler and Jake Haener running it?
Man, based on what we saw from OTAs and minicamp, it feels like there's at least some level of presence for motion, play action, all of that in whatever their base approach to offense is. Like they have built it into the foundation of their offense. And so I think if you're really trying to get a look at Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler, then give them those. Give them those in live bullets, give them those in live action so that they get the opportunity to show what they're doing. Look, Derek Carr is the quarterback for now, but he's not going to be the quarterback of the future. And that's not about Derek Carr being good or bad. That's about Derek Carr's age, right? Like you don't have a 10-year quarterback right now and everything like that. So get a look at these guys in the offense that you hope to be running for, or, is an offense similar to what you hope to be running for the next 5 to 10 years, and then give them the opportunities to run that. I think they have to be given at least some portion of that and everything, and give them the opportunity to be able to show that they can handle that they can orchestrate it, that they can run it, that they can excel in it, all those other things. Like let them prove themselves in what the identity of your offense is.
Yeah. I mean, it's just how it has to be. I mean, don't take it from us. Take it from us. This is how it should be, right? I mean, I don't think it's rocket surgery, right? I mean, it just
rocket surgery.
Yeah, rocket surgery. We're not saying rocket science. It's rocket surgery. You know what I'm saying?
I've never heard rocket surgery before.
You never heard that one before? Oh man,
no,
that's a good one.
I love that.
That's not a John is
rocket surgery and brain science.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
I dig it. I'm all about it.
Why not? Yeah, for sure. All right, let's get some more of these questions because, man, I don't know how an hour already passed and stuff, but,
Insane.
It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. But I'll run down the list and some of them. We've talked about some of the top position battles. We've talked about, I might just go rapid fire and stuff. Who's going to win the backup quarterback spot? You think it's Rattler or is it going to be Jake Haener?
I'll give it to Haener for right now. He's in the lead, so I'll keep it that way.
I think Haener's going to win. I think he is, but I expect stiff competition from Spencer Rattler. I think he can be good. I think he's going to maybe struggle a little bit at first, but then he'll pick it up a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
I could see Haener. Yeah, and I could see Haener winning it this year, but then Rattler taking it further next year. You know what I mean? Like just because the one battle happens this year and falls a certain way this year doesn't really give you an identification of what it's going to mean for like the rest of their tenure with the team.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. When will we see Chase Young gonna hit the field, and is anybody gonna land on Pup? We kind of talked about Pup. I think Chase Young should be. I mean, everything was positive. I don't think he's gonna be like a full go the first day,
right?
But I would expect to see that ramp up period, that we always see and such. So that would be what I would say on him. I'm
going to be really curious. On the PUP question, I want to be really curious about Tano Passanio. Does he end up on the physically unable to perform list, or does he end up on the NFI list and non-football injury list? Because that would give us an indication of whether or not the injury happened during a practice or when he was getting ready for camp. And that kind of changes the timeline of return possibility too. So that's an identifier would be if he's on the NFI list, then perhaps his return might actually be able to be a little bit earlier than we anticipate because it could have happened before mini camps and all that other stuff. Whereas if it's in the physically unable to perform list, then it probably happened during one of those OTA days when we weren't present or whatever that might be. And then therefore his timeline would be shifted to later in that case. So I think that gives you a little bit of an indication of what your expectations can be for Passanio when we figure that out.
For sure. Yeah, we'll see how that plays out. And it's going to be one of the big ones that we find out. Turner or Foskey, are they going to make the leaps that we need to see in training camp?
Great question. They're going to have the opportunity but with that Passanio injury being factored in, they're going to have the opportunities ahead of them. So yeah, we'll see which one of them takes that opportunity. And I think like it's certainly more pressing for Turner than it is for Foskey, isn't it? Like Foskey can take another year to settle in and all that. Turner's in a contract year with no 5th-year option pickup. So this is like the year for him to prove it. And he's never been able to be on the field for more than 170 defensive snaps in a season. So this is a big year for him.
Yeah. And with no Tano, he's going to be the guy in the middle. I mean, he just is. Just how it's going to work out. And so I think he's got to deliver, right? I mean, if you can get him to go at least 85% of the games this year, I think that's a win, right? If he gets hurt or something happens, then it's going to be tough to justify. But there are some we've had the question about free agents, pass rushers and stuff. But again, that's probably more indicative of what happens. I think Carl Granderson's in for a big year, so I think
Yeah.
he's going to hit double-digit sack territory this year. But not
I
that
think
we're
he's a
talking about
double-double
him
guy.
specifically.
Yeah, I think he's a double-double guy this year. Both double-digit sacks, double-digit tackles for a loss.
There you go. I like it. Double-double. That's the first time I've heard that one too. Look, we
have you heard
schooling
the?
is.
Look, let's just go. Did you hear Cam's triple-double years ago when he had the double-digit sacks, double-digit tackles for a loss, and double-digit batted balls at the line?
Okay.
It's just a little bit of a tone down from that. That's all.
It's just, there you go. Walking it down a little bit. I get you. All right. Which second-year drafted player? Which one's going to make the biggest impact for this team this year? And probably at camp. I mean, I think Brzez's probably the obvious answer, but I think there's arguments to be made on some of these other guys. But who would you take on that aspect?
Maybe Kendre Miller. If it's a true committee, I would see Kendre Miller. Obviously, A.T. Perry is a good option there too. But if it's a true committee and a wide zone run predicated offense, then all the signs point to the opportunity being there for Kendre.
Yeah, I mean, Brzez's probably the obvious one because of the playing time and what he's going to be able to do this year. Kendre Miller is probably the next guy I was thinking, and I would probably say A.T. Perry and Jordan Howden being there. Now, if Saldivari ends up being the left guard,
Saldivari's a good pick too.
That's huge one. I mean, if he continues that work, and dude's been working hard, working out, he's been killing it. You know what I mean? If you check on Instagram, you see what the work he's been putting in. Like, it's no joke. I mean, he's doing it. You know what I mean? And so hopefully it translated on the field. We kind of mentioned Ramczyk. Hopefully we get some kind of update. You know, I just don't think there's any reason to bring this out and hold this out or keep this going, lingering. You know what I mean? We talked about the offensive line. I asked this one, or we kind of maybe loosely talk about it, but outside the O-line, which position group do you think has the most to prove this year?
I would say the defensive line. For me, it's the trenches on both sides.
It's pretty easy,
yeah.
It's definitely defensive line for me. They just got to affect the quarterback better. They got to be better against the run. They got to finish plays, finish sacks. That's practically in a nutshell what you want to see.
Agreed.
Is camp in California a big deal? Are they going to benefit more because they're playing away from New Orleans?
I think so. I mean, heck, they get out of the heat. First of all, that's always beneficial. And so do we. So we'll take that. We already had our first named hurricane in July and June and everything like that. So that's probably another thing to factor in. But I think above all, from the football standpoint, is you've got a new offensive system, you've got a new playbook. Having everybody around each other all the time, I think there's benefit there.
Yeah, and we've talked about that on past pods, just that, you're going to have more of a camaraderie, a lot more to learn about. So I'm with you. I think it's going to be beneficial. I think it's going to be beneficial that their games are on the West Coast, that you're going to have joint practices with the 49ers. I just think it is a win, and, hopefully it doesn't necessarily become the norm, because that would go against kind of what they've said with the renovations, but we'll see. We'll take it a year at a time, but they haven't ruled out going back to California. Right. So who knows? Only allowed to pick one here. I'm making that rule. Which free agent pickup is going to make the biggest impact this year? Or in camp, maybe. That might be where we're looking at.
Oh, in camp? Okay.
I'm going to say camp. I'd say camp because I've centered these questions around training camp. So that's where I would say.
Yeah, that makes it a little bit easier then. I will go. I'm caught between two, but I'm going to go with Willie Gay.
Okay.
He's the Saints don't have that many interesting position battles this year. No. He could force one. You know what I mean? There's kind of the specialist ones that we kind of have to wait and see how that actually goes. It's not that a position battle at specialist isn't interesting. It's just how interesting will that battle actually be is still a big question mark. And then there's not really anybody jostling for a starting role anywhere at this moment outside of maybe that safety spot. But like we said, that seems pretty much sewn up for Johnathan Abram to hold on to with good performance. So I would say Willie Gay, because he's the one that can create the most noise potentially, maybe create a position battle that we're not looking at as of right now. He'll be on the field, which makes me not go to Chase Young because we expect the ramp up there. But I did have another guy. I'm curious about who you picked first.
I think you're probably thinking. I was going to go with Willie Gay Jr. was one of my picks. I was going to say Will Harris. That's probably what I was
okay.
thinking a
Yeah.
little bit. Will Harris was one, and then he was one I was thinking about, but the other one would have been Cedric Wilson.
Yeah. Yep.
Cedric Wilson would have been my guy because I think if he keeps up, he's going to be the slot guy for this team. And so I think he's somebody that's going to make a good, considerable impact. And people are going to be like, oh, this guy can do a lot for this team. And so I think that's probably true. But I like the concept of Will Harris playing more and doing more, especially with guys like JT Gray. Like, I know he hasn't been available as much, but he's a core special teamer. Special teams matter a lot. He can play reserve role if you need to. So that's kind of why I think about him too.
Yeah, I think Willie Gay, Cedric Wilson are also the two guys that we'll look at and go, wow, like those are really value free agent signings. Like those guys had a way bigger impact than their contract. And I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yep. We've talked about drafted rookies. Bub Means was your guy for sure, making a big impact. Do you have a favorite undrafted rookie? I mean, I think it's Dallin Holker. Probably would say.
Miller Bradford's on there too. Easier. Isaiah Stallbird's on there too. Like there's a few, but yeah, I think Holker's the big one.
So let's take it a step further. Who's going to make a push for the final for a roster spot? I think that's the big question. I think Holker's probably. I don't want to say he's wrapped up that spot, but like it's pretty good outlook for Dallin Holker probably to make the team.
It feels like he has the most direct spot to a roster spot, or direct path to a roster spot, excuse me, of any of the undrafted guys. I guess the guy that would have the next one might be Miller Bradford of that group. But man, there's so many safeties on that roster too. Will Harris included, Johnathan, Abram, Jordan Howden, Tyrann Mathieu. Like you have all these veteran guys that are there. JT Gray. Yeah, you have all these veteran guys that are there. Plus you've got other guys that can make things interesting like Anthony Johnson and others. And so like there's really kind of, it's just a tough one to project that, he gets in there. But I mean, just being a playmaker means something. And so I think that would be a part of what you have to factor in there.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, it's got to be Holker. I mean, Holker's got the best outlook for sure. And, it's just, when it's all said and done, you're going to see some movement on there. And when we're at camp, there's a lot of things that go down. We try our best to put our eyeballs on everybody. You know what I mean? Because I know people are going to ask us like, how's this guy doing? And it's like, you see a little bit of him. And if he makes a play every day, then we'll pick up on stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like that was how we kind of saw about Trajan Jeffcoat, or Bradford, you know what I mean? He's obviously had a nose for the football and stuff. And so I like those concepts. And of course I can't wait to see some of that hitting too. That'll be good.
Oh man,
for sure. Can't wait. Bart Scott. Kind of some of the other ones, not that they're big ones, but overlooked player that can challenge for more of a larger role or playing time this year. Do you have anybody in mind?
I mean, a lot of those guys we've kind of already talked about. Yeah, I don't know. It's so tough. No, not really. I mean, I guess maybe one guy that's been kind of overlooked just because he's kind of left out of conversation is Christian Boyd. You mentioned earlier he could be the fourth defensive tackle. He's the guy that's kind of typically overlooked within the draft class. He was one of the early 6th round picks and all that. And then, there was Josiah Zerum after him, but Josiah Zerum feels a little bit more like projects, like keep him around, practice squad, let him develop, let him take his time. You don't have to rush him. But Christian Boyd could be on the field right away for New Orleans. And so I might say that he would be the one that maybe pushes for a bigger role than maybe expected. He's kind of the one that jumps out to me.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably accurate. I think if you look at offensive line, it depends on that left guard spot. Oludo, I want to see him. You know what I mean? Like I want to see more of him, or a Lucas Patrick. I think that's the two that kind of stand out to me. I think another one, a wild card here is Khaleke Hudson, right? I just in the linebacking room. I think he's somebody that probably could, because you got to see what happens with Nephi Sewell. I know he's still recovering from that ACL injury, but you talk about a guy that special teams that could, he started games for Washington, so it's not like this guy doesn't have experience, and so it'd be one that I'd keep an eye on for sure personally.
Yeah.
Do you see the new kickoff role impacting the final roster a lot? I think we kind of walked some of this down, but Do you think they keep extra
Yeah.
safeties or extra DBs? Like, it's going to be fascinating because Darren Rizzi's already talked about working on this a lot, but
Right.
fascinating to see what his thought process is because he said during preseason, expect a lot of penalties. It's going to look
Mhm.
sloppy, all these different things, but I'm just fascinated to see if it changes the makeup of the final roster.
Yeah, yeah, it could be really interesting to see. I think that what did we see mostly, John? We saw a lot of wide receivers, a lot of safeties. We saw defensive
D-backs.
linemen
Yeah. Some.
and
Mhm.
as well.
Don't
Um,
forget about the fullback. We
yeah,
saw a
fullback was
fullback.
there. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that like it's definitely gonna impact the roster makeup. I don't know. I hesitate to roll with a lot because I don't know what a lot means.
Sure.
But I would definitely say that the idea of the sorry, we're getting a flash flood warning.
Oh,
That we're,
okay.
the it was just like, okay, well, that's just gonna
I
make
mean,
noise. Sorry.
great.
Um, but I would say probably that like it's gonna have an impact on roster construction for sure. Like no doubt about that.
Yeah. Yeah. It just is. So, um, the last one I think I'll leave with this and because there's other questions, but the last one, who's on the bubble? I think that's going to be fascinating to see who's on
Oh,
this
the
roster.
Buble.
Hmm.
Who is on the Buble?
I think that
That's tough.
I I don't want to put him out there, but also at the same time, we mentioned him a little bit earlier. JT Gray, if he can't stay available, that's one that comes to
Yeah.
mind. That wouldn't be necessarily surprising, but that's somebody that I would think of that comes to mind. Um, you look at, I mean, I don't know. It's tough to say because it's going to be hard to do these final cuts and how they piece together this roster. I don't want to put Peyton
Yeah.
Turner there. I don't want to put Isaiah Foskey there. And linebacker wise, I mean, DeMarco Jackson's too valuable on special teams. You don't do that. Maybe a Nephi Sewell if he can't hit the field, and guys like Jalen Ford and Isaiah Stalbird or Monty Rice, who we didn't really talk about. He's another guy that's under the
Oh,
radar,
right.
or
Of course.
guys that can do more, for the defense and for the special teams. I mean, it matters, but there's just some things,
Yeah.
some that come off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with this one. I think a lot of people would say Jamal Williams in the running back room.
I've heard that one.
Um,
I've heard that one.
I don't agree with it. I'll mention it just because I know that it's one of the ones that's consistently discussed. You still need somebody that can run between the tackles. Like you
Right.
still need that player that's gonna be able to do that. So I actually don't think that he's on the roster bubble. Ugo Amadi can make things really interesting too. He was another safety we didn't name earlier. He could because
Yep.
he was such a good core special teamer for them last year. This year we watched him play like 5 or 6 different responsibilities on special teams over the course of OTAs and minicamp. So he could be another guy that makes things interesting for the safety spot, maybe pushes some guys out from there. Yeah, I don't know. I think the guys that you named are probably the best ones to maybe point to. I think that this roster just feels so it just feels so obvious where this roster is
Yeah.
headed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Another guy though that could push for a little bit more opportunity right now is Foster Morrow. He could be another one that
Big time.
pushes for a lot more opportunity with Juwan Johnson dealing with that injury, everything. Like he bulked up, got much bigger. He looks so ready to play football right now. It's insane. And he just has the attitude of like the guy that should be out there playing football as much as possible.
Right.
It just like that makes a lot of sense for me too. So he could be a guy that could end up having maybe a bigger role than people think. Cause I think a lot of people just think of him as the blocking tight end now.
Right.
But that's far from the reality of who Foster Morrow is.
Yeah, there was that one practice. He had 7 targets and he caught 6 balls.
Right.
I mean, like
Right.
he was active. He was the guy, you know what I mean? And so,
Yep.
and of course, that's remains to be seen. But there's just so many fun things that are coming our way in 2 weeks, Ross. In 2
Man.
weeks, like less than 2 weeks, we'll be out in
Man.
Cali. We'll be out there, man. It's crazy to think that we're almost here, almost at this point. And so, I think when we look at and come back, next week and stuff, we'll probably get into more of the positional breakdowns and some of the guys and talk about just about everybody. But we just wanted to come on and obviously talk about some of these questions. And, obviously I said some stuff that there's some exciting things happening with
Oh, yeah.
Pod. I do want to tell everybody that we have officially joined up with the Minute Media and Red Circle podcast network. So we got picked up by them. And so that's obviously a big deal for us. And we haven't been around that long as us as a podcast, group. And so it's only because of you guys and your support. There may be some bigger things coming that, can't say yet, but are coming. And then look, if any of the SoCal fans are out here, we're going to plan on doing a live show. We got a venue already picked out. August 8th is the tentative date for us at Bourbon Street Bar and Grill in Fullerton. So put that on your calendar. That's obviously a big deal for us.
Can't wait
something
for
we're going to try. And man, just to meet fans and to interact and have some fun at a New Orleans themed. It's one of the bars that shows Saints games that you can find in SoCal. So really excited about that. But us getting picked up and obviously is a big deal. More things are happening with us, and we're going to be busy come training camp. But again, I can't thank you guys enough for all your support. And I also have a giveaway for somebody, that Foco chef apron set. I've got to give that away to a fan. So I got to figure out a good way to do it. But maybe hit me up on my Twitter and send me a DM because I got one to give away, because that was in honor of us hitting over 1,000 subscribers. So, man, crazy times,
man. Goodness.
Yeah, I know it's a lot happening for us in such a short time. So again, it's going to be a good season. Regardless, hopefully it's an even better one with the Saints doing what they're supposed to. But man, well, Ross, aside the flash flood warning,
for real.
What you got going on?
Goodness.
Are you gonna have to swim home? Swim
I was gonna say, thankfully, I learned how to swim 4th of July day, so I'm gonna be fine. Everybody, don't worry about me. I'll be just fine over here. Even learned how to tread a little water, so I'm gonna be good. Okay. No, I'm in a raised house. I'm Gucci. But okay. I, just continuing to put shows out every day over at Locked On Saints, making sure everybody's got everything that they need. I went through kind of like best case and most realistic scenarios for each of the Saints' core 5 young weapons: Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Johnathan, and Kendra Miller. And then I threw in Dallin Holker as well, looking at 2024. So what are like best case? What are things? What has to happen in order for those to happen? So I looked at that along with Mike Clay's great research, where he projected the production of every single player across the NFL. So really, really incredible work there. So got that. And then, of course, some written work and everything, of course, coming up over at Saints News Network. Still have some good stuff coming up about some of I got a great interview with a Saints staffer that I'm really excited, whose story I'm really excited to tell. I went into that interview thinking that it was going to be about one thing, and then it turned into this like inspirational story. And so I cannot wait to share it. So, but I want to do it justice. So I'm taking my time with it. So, but that should be out in the next couple of weeks ahead of training camp. So I'm excited about that. What about you, bud?
Well,
I'm excited for your Taysom Hill piece.
Yeah, man, I've been diving in hardcore on that one. So I've been looking at all sorts of data and certain things on it. So that's something that should be coming soon. I'm also working on a fantasy football preview. So when it comes to Saints, anything that you need to know for that, working on that yearly preview. And then it's time to get into training camp. So we're looking at position and breakdowns, all the things that we probably can expect. And then it's training camp mode, right? I mean, that's the biggest thing, is that we're going to be in training camp mode. There's a lot of fun things that are coming through it. The schedule, we'll figure out with a schedule, because it's going to be West Coast, which we're at Central New Orleans time. It's 2 hours behind, if you will. And so all the practices are going to be in the morning, like 9 to 11:45 is the kind of the time frame over there. So it'll be a good chance for us to get a lot of stuff done, and then, be able to jump on here later and we'll work all those details out. But it's training camp, baby. That's all we won't be working on.
Camp,
so
baby.
Yeah, that's it. So, well, man, Ross, I can't tell you enough how much I enjoy doing this with you, and
same, dude.
How happy I am, and just how fast time flies when we do this, dude. I don't know. I don't understand it. And so thank you all that are tuning in too. So you guys are awesome. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Second and Saints. Tons of things brewing here. We are really excited about the future of this pod, and it's only because of you guys. Who Dat Nation is fantastic, and we love you guys without getting all sappy and stuff. But it's because of you that we keep doing this, and we want a podcast show that's for you guys, and we've said that plenty of times. So that's gonna do it for us. Another episode in the books. On behalf of Ross Jackson, I am John Hendricks signing out for another episode of Second and Saints. Y'all be good people. Stay safe, please. And if anybody was out there with the hurricane barrel, all that other stuff, we hope you're doing extremely well.
Yes.
Our thoughts are with you. If you need something, hit us up, please. We can try to do what we can to help you guys. But glad to hear it. Glad to see that everything's okay from there. But that'll do it for us today. Y'all have a good one, guys.